Welcome to Pennsylvania in Focus. I'm Kristen Smith. Joining me today is the Center Square's Pennsylvania reporter, Christina Langell. Earlier this week, we had breaking news out of Clairton, Pennsylvania, which is just south of Pittsburgh, where a U.S. steel plant had a deadly explosion. Tell us more about what happened, Christina.
Yeah, so there was an explosion in the coke plant, which is specifically where they take coal and superheat it for part of the process for making steel. And it's a very, very hot blast furnace, the gases that it produces can be explosive. It's an inherently very dangerous process. So while they haven't explained yet, or they haven't found out yet what the actual specific cause of the explosion was, it's a pretty volatile endeavor to begin with. Unfortunately, 2 employees were killed in the explosion. One of them, his name was TQ, and, we've heard a little bit from his family and from his coworkers. The family has chosen to remain anonymous. And then there were significant injuries from, I think 10 workers were hospitalized.
There's been a lot of reaction to this, obviously sadness, grief, horror, but there's already a lot of questions about motive and how police are being kind of tight-lipped right now about it.
Yes. And what I have seen, earlier this week, Governor Shapiro went out to Clairton and spoke along with County Executive Sara Innamorato. And they talked about it. They really emphasized, as did the president of U.S. Steel, that it's all under investigation. They didn't say anything about a possible criminal motive at that time. But like you said, there has been word that homicide and ATF and different people have investigated. Of course, they're always going to want to check and see. There were also, one reporter brought up to Executive Burritt asking, hey, we have employees here who say that when there's a safety issue, they're, reactive, not proactive, that there are some big, missteps when it comes to safety in the plant. And, he said he was shocked and outraged to hear that, and that safety is a major priority. They also, we heard questions from reporters asking, well, do you think that the new ownership, Nepon Steel, because we've been, talking so much about U.S. Steel and the acquisition from Nepon, is this going to be a shift towards, modernizing and making safer these sorts of manufacturing processes so that this kind of thing isn't really a question? I actually talked to someone who used to work in Bethlehem Steel, which was another, Pennsylvania-based steel company. And they said, if there was ever a hell on earth, it was a coke plant, like just the smell of sulfur, the intense heat, so people are really looking for ways that we could, still have that manufacturing focus while updating it and innovating it so that it's not quite so hazardous of a process.
It's interesting that you bring up Nepon because, as you said, that's been keeping U.S. Steel in the news for years now, particularly in the last 6 months as President Trump allowed that deal to go through. And one of Nepon's big claims to why their deal was the best is that they could modernize their facilities and that they were going to move production to a more environmentally friendly place. Now, I'm not 100% knowledgeable about what exactly that means, but that is something that they have said they're going to do with their almost $15 billion investment. But it does raise concerns. We can't say for sure that this wasn't a safety issue. Again, it's hard to imagine that if it's a place called hell on earth, that it wouldn't be difficult for there to be a safety problem, not, intentionally or because of negligence on the company's part, but because it is just a really dangerous work environment to be in. And so I think that there's been some criticism, particularly from environmental groups, about what this means. But can you talk a little bit more about what some of them have had to say about this?
Well, yeah, the explosion itself, the gases that are released from an explosion like that, there's a huge concern about. These are things that they are ostensibly monitoring all the time anyway, because of what it's putting out into the environment. They have said that there is no noticeable, nothing's out of the ordinary. The readings haven't changed since the explosion, that people are safe. There was that initial stay at home order so that people weren't breathing in the air while they were still, out there with DEP seeing. And Governor Shapiro did say that, they would be continuing to monitor the situation and stay vigilant about it. So DEP is monitoring the air and water quality. But you're absolutely right. It's a concern all the time with any industrial production. It's going to be a polluter. And especially when you look at something like Coke, I mean, there you're burning coal. So, we're using fossil fuels there. So, and the investments that they're hoping Nepon will make into modernizing should, hopefully we're seeing as all of these different technologies start to modernize, and a movement towards less environmentally costly production.
I think an interesting comparison here to bring up, given that we are close to the Pennsylvania, or that this plant is close to the Pennsylvania-Ohio border, was 2 years ago when there was the Norfolk Southern train derailment in East Palestine. And like I said, a couple miles from the Pennsylvania border. So this incident impacted a lot of Commonwealth residents. And the response from Norfolk Southern was a lot more cagey. And of course, we don't know the cause. We don't know how much U.S. Steel can be at fault for this, if at all, or, there's very different situations here. But in that case, Norfolk Southern made a decision to burn off the chemicals in 5 derailed cars that were considered toxic. And there was a ton of concern about that decision that was made, even from our own governor. There were lawsuits filed that were eventually settled by Norfolk Southern because it was found that their negligence to maintain their train cars and their network is ultimately what caused the derailment. And then their decision to burn off the chemicals in the cars, a lot of criticism arose about, was that the right decision, or was that just the decision that they wanted to make to get things moving again as quickly as possible? Again, we can't say, that's not to say that U.S. Steel has acted in any way that way, but it is a very interesting comparison given the location of these industrial accidents and the region that is consistently impacted by these sort of accidents. This is also the region of Pennsylvania where there has been investigations into how natural gas drilling has impacted water quality. And it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds, how U.S. Steel continues to respond to this, and the impact to the environment and the communities around it.
Yes. And it's definitely true. Our industrial areas in the state take the brunt of these pollution issues. And I think that's something that, I've written a lot about as bills have gone through that, look at the cumulative total. So when you live in an area like that, that Pittsburgh, Allegheny County region, it's not just one thing, right? It's not just the steel plant or the natural gas drilling. It's the cumulative impact of all these things together. So I think that that's something that they're definitely watching. And I do think hopefully one big distinction between this and the incident that you're talking about with the train derailment is I think there's a lot of pressure on U.S. Steel with the Nepon Steel deal to be really transparent and to really have it go well. Because people have brought up already shutting down the plant entirely. And that's just, something where all eyes are on them. So I think they're treading very carefully. And there's also, there's unions involved, and the union, U.S. Steel Union, or the United Steelworkers Union, their first priority is their workers and their safety. So there's a different sort of representation coming from that organized union than you would have from, the community who's just kind of at the mercy of whatever happens with pollution.
Yeah, and the intersection between community and the workers, that brings up a lot of interesting dynamics, because arguably these industrial plants are not only huge parts of their economy and what helps keep those regions going. But a lot of people see this as a legacy on their part. They've had generations of family involved in this. And so there's a lot of mixed feelings, I think, among community members and maybe even the workers themselves about how to handle this. And I think we're going to see some interesting developments out of this and how this moves forward. You know, the union obviously has a very important role to play in this. Their main priority is protecting their members and making sure it's a safe work environment. And when you have incidents like this, it isn't just a state issue. It's going to be a federal concern. So there's going to be a lot more to report on this. And I know that you will be front and center keeping us updated. So to follow us in that story, check us out at thecentersquare.com/Pennsylvania.